the Lucy Robbins Wells Library, and I am here with this lovely group to talk to you about another part of our diversity series. And tonight the title is Ahead of the Holidays, Accepting Other People's Differences. So we'll all have the opportunity to meet with different people over the next few months, and how can we make them more comfortable and included at our gathering. So as always, I'm going to defer to the owner of Indelible Impressions, Yvonne Alston. Yvonne, talk to us.
All right. Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be here tonight and talk to you guys once again. Um, this particular topic I thought was a nice buildup of other discussions that we've had, especially with a lot of the holidays coming forth, regardless of what you celebrate. This is the season for that. And so I wanted to make sure that we got the opportunity to dialogue together and just talk a little bit about how we can kind of walk that fine line in terms of enjoying our holiday seasons with our families. But with so much going on in the world, there's a lot of discussion happening on culture, society, a bunch of what we might refer to as sticky topics. And so wanted to gather the group around to have a discussion on that and provide hopefully some tips around what can help in terms of having those dialogues. So with that, I'm going to just share my screen and we will get into having a conversation. So the holidays are really a perfect opportunity to gather, catch up, celebrate with friends and family. But while the general mood is often happy and celebratory, plenty of us have probably experienced the dread, the awkward dinner table conversations that sometimes take place. And when we think about, as I just mentioned, some of the societal changes that are going on right now, very politically charged type of environment and conversations are happening, there's really a good chance for someone to kind of steer the conversation onto areas and topics that can be tough. And sometimes that's intentional because it needs to be discussed while the family is gathered and around. And we also kind of have some folks that I don't know about you, but I know in my own family, we've got some people who kind of like to just throw grenades, if you will, and throw something out there to have a really kind of in-depth conversation that they know is going to be a little bit tricky. And so I wanted us to just kind of go around and talk a little bit about different topics that might leave us or even our loved ones a little bit uncomfortable. That could be discussions around state of policing, race, sexual orientation, and things like that. So with that, what do you do? What is our typical go-to when it comes to trying to have these conversations with one another? So I'd love to have some folks come off mute and let's talk about it. All right, Michelle, you unmuted. I saw
I,
you.
yes, I did. Here I am. Um, I think it's important, as you just said, that everybody is comfortable. And I always try to um, just think of what's being said and how I can make it more comfortable for everybody else. So someone would say, oh, I heard this in politics, and I'll just, kind of do something silly like la 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 la, we don't need to do that now, just kind of without offending anyone, just kind of move it along in a positive direction, use positive reinforcement and just kind of change what's going on to make everybody more comfortable so someone else doesn't have to say something else and have some type of a adverse conversation that we don't want to be having at a holiday.
Right. And do you mind sharing with all of us, since we're talking about this kind of openly and honestly, what might be some of the topics that, you feel like could, emotionally kind of charge the environment that are tough to work around?
I think sometimes politics can be, something like that.
Yeah.
And you're the people you're around, and I try to just be very never to give a solid opinion, but always try to soften the situation, and just
Right.
totally, not to ruin 15 people's night, or or to get myself, if I totally don't agree with a situation, I'll just kind of like, la 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 la, and just kind of, it doesn't have to happen here, it doesn't have to happen now. If you want to have a private conversation with a person after, totally different to me.
Yeah. Okay. I saw Pat. I saw you nodding your head, Pat. So feel free to come off. You too, Jill. I see you here now.
I, okay, so I live with my daughter and her husband and my grandson, and my son-in-law has a fairly good-sized family, but not everybody is on the same wavelength politically, mostly. And it's hard to make, I mean, I have memories of Christmas holidays from the past, and that's not necessarily what we do here. So it's hard to enjoy and make memories now. I just kind of go with the flow.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's easier. If you
And pushing back.
if you have it in your heart what the holidays were for you, but not necessarily for everybody else, it's easier to just discount some of the conversations that pop up. It's easier for me, because otherwise you'd be, at each other's throat most of the evening. And I think politics right now has played a great part in separating people, dividing people. And it's hard not to feed into that. Not for me, because I'm out of it. And then we've got the whole vaccine thing.
Yeah. I was waiting for someone to bring that up to see if the vaccine was going to come up as a topic. Yeah.
I have some good friends who choose not to be vaccinated, and I personally can't understand that mentality, but it is what it is, which is a favorite saying of everybody on the East Coast, I swear. It is what it is, so we can't do anything about it. And it's hard to gather together for any kind of a meal or, family gathering without something like that coming up. So.
Okay. All right, Leslie.
I just want to say that the whole vaccine thing, I thought that some people were more pro-vaccine, and then I find out that they're not. That was a little disconcerting for me. They're all suspicious of the vaccine, and I was like, that's kind of odd. I just came back from the Midwest, where I was in Indianapolis, and they are not wearing the masks in the stores. They're just very chill and relaxed about the thing. But then I went to Chicago, and there's still the mask mandate where you have to wear it inside all the time. And of course, flying back and forth, you have to wear your mask inside all the time. Yeah. And it's just like so weird. And so I got back here, went to Stop and Shop. All my masks were in the wash, and I had nothing. And I walked around there naked today for the first time in like a year.
Physically naked, but just your face, right? Just
well,
for anybody watching this after the fact.
I was like, do I smile? Do I not smile? Do I not look at anybody in the eye? So weird today.
Yeah.
And it wasn't because I didn't think of it because I have a stance. It was because I just had no mask with me. I would have worn it, but I didn't. And I was like, all right, I felt like this is it. This is me. I'm in the grocery store. If I have it next time, I will wear it. But this time I did not. So I still went in the grocery store. It was just kind of odd, though. I felt like people were staring at me.
Yeah. Stephanie.
Am I muted?
Nope, you're on.
All right. I think this is such a good topic. I think, like you've mentioned, like everything really feels very divisive right now, whether it's politics, the experiences around COVID and the vaccine. Whereas maybe before, it would have been like sports. And,
Right?
yeah, and I think we need to feel a part of something bigger, that we need to connect more. And I was just thinking when you were talking about how not only do some of these difficult interactions happen like in person, I'm finding less and less get-togethers, but more of it kind of playing out on Facebook, even amongst friends or family members. And personally, I've had my own experience with this recently, where we don't have a lot of family in the area, and so we've felt really connected with our church. And I was under the perception that there was room for like multiple beliefs or experiences, or where we stand or what our needs are, because I felt like that was what was verbalized. And what I've recently experienced is the opposite. And so I had to kind of navigate a situation and make the decision to move my child out of a school based on it. And so I had to have firsthand experience of having some difficult conversations around these topics.
And for however much you feel comfortable, divulging and kind of talking about tonight with the group, what was that experience like for you, and what steps did you take to navigate that dialogue, right? Because I can imagine that is extremely tough. Like, we're thinking about it in the context of holidays and gatherings, but obviously your situation is much more serious, I would say, than that, in terms of having to take a hard line stance, and then make a decision as a result of that doesn't just have implications for you, but certainly your child as well, and their comfort and their environment and that change.
Yeah. Yeah. All of that, but also around the holidays, because it's thinking ahead and figuring out, how does this play out? Are we going to attend services? Are we going to still connect with the people that we feel are a part of our community, or do we feel on the out?
Wow.
So what did I do? I tried denial, and that wasn't really working well.
Appreciate your honesty and candor. She's like, I tried denial. And then you tried like the drink that Marco just flashed up on the screen, a little vino.
No,
Denial didn't work. And
yeah,
then you moved on to
yeah. And then I don't know. I think when it comes to myself, that's definitely been my own work in progress. But when it involves your child, it just is a different level of motivation. Or if it involves other children, it's a different level of motivation. And so I, tried to speak directly, and it was made pretty clear, the stance, and it was communicated to me really clearly by how they were speaking, to not go there.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So what I tend to do, though, when I'm having to have difficult conversations, is to first kind of make sure that I set myself up where I'm able to, be the most grounded. So I'm making sure, like, what can I do? Like, if I'm up all night ruminating about it, like,
Mhm.
what do I need to do to get a better night's sleep? Making sure that I'm eating, taking care of those basic needs.
Mhm.
And then also then connecting like with my husband, making sure, like talking out, like, are we on the same page? And if not, like, figuring out how to balance that out. And then made the hard decisions,
Yeah.
wrote the letter, communicated, our reasons, and put it out there. So we're kind of still in it a little bit, but yeah.
And how are you feeling on the other side of that now?
I feel really good. I feel really good because I feel like I was being authentic, because I think my tendency was to be more of a people pleaser. So I don't want to harm people,
Yeah.
but I
So
was kind of
passive.
patterned to be silent, but
Yeah.
then realizing that the silence was communicating that I agreed.
Mm.
The case. So I needed to find a way to do that. Like, I didn't need the validation from them to make what I felt okay. And I didn't need to shove what I believed down their throat, but I wasn't going to continue to put myself or my child in a situation that wasn't healthy in our experience.
I gotta give you applause on that, girlfriend, because that was like, not an easy decision around whatever it was that where you and this other church or organization were at this impasse. So I feel like I've got to tap Jill next because
Oh
I know
boy.
Jill has a perspective on this
No,
very topic. I mean, it's
no,
Jill Nelson. I mean, come on.
Jill's shy, reserved, quiet. No,
Yeah.
I actually, and this was prior to the last speaker, because so I want to say there is definitely something to be said if you or your family are in a situation where there's hatred or ignorance or belligerence or any of those things, and certainly you should remove yourself and especially children from that. However, prior to that, when you guys were kind of talking about just sort of the holidays, I picture Thanksgiving around a table, potentially Christmas, Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, etc. And I might take a little bit of a different perspective, because I feel like within reason, this is an opportunity.
Mhm.
So instead of changing the subject, instead
Mhm.
of trying to not have the conversations, I'm open to having them. My wife and I, we do we call it a Misfits Thanksgiving, and we've been doing it for
Mm.
years. So our Thanksgiving table consists of anyone who doesn't have somewhere to go. So if anyone's
Love it.
listening and you're in Western Massachusetts, Connecticut, and you have nowhere to be on Thanksgiving, just let me know. I need a week's advance notice because we have to get a bigger turkey if any more people come. But what's so marvelous, and my poor wife is sitting here going, more people. Like, I invite people in the grocery store.
She's like, "Can you extend that invitation so openly?" All right, Jill.
But the idea is that,
Yeah.
when I think about our table, right, I have,
Right.
an uncle who is is white and 60 plus. I have, a handful of cousins of various genders. I have my friend who's coming. Oh, and the dogs are going to bark. Honey, do you want to try to maybe stop that? Thank you. I have my friend who's coming who is Black and maybe bringing his friend who is identifying as they, them, and is white. And so like all these different perspectives, right? And you get, and then I have my family friend who she's 80 something, 85, 6, 7, extremely Catholic. Like I was very afraid to come out to her but she loves us and says, my wife and I are her daughters, but, has definitely a different, perspective and this religious belief system that others at the table might not have. So I guess my thing is like, is there actually an opportunity
Yes.
to start conversations
Yeah.
that you might not otherwise be able to have? Understanding that there has to be a respect, that you have to give and take. I hated this when I was a kid. My mom has since passed, but she used to say, agree to disagree. And I really adopted that perspective during the Trump administration because I didn't agree with anything that anyone said that was in support of him. But I did step back and allow them, if it didn't hurt me physically and or hurt someone else physically, I did allow them to have their perspective, even though I didn't like it. So I guess I just throw that out as a differing way of looking at things.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's why I knew you would have a perspective. And I will say,
And mind you, I'm coming from a situation where like my grandparents were extraordinarily racist, bigots. Like I dated black men my whole life. That was not a good thing. Then I met a tiny little white woman and married her. That was certainly not a good thing. So like I've been dealing with this issue of like this real intense hatred for so long, but I just shut up and or I got angry. And both of those weren't great reactions. So now I really try to just talk and understand. I don't have to agree with their perspective, but where is it coming from? Why do they have it? Why are they so upset or so angry or so afraid of what they don't know?
And there it is. And that's why a lot of times when I am coaching folks or organizations, I talk about the power of curiosity, right? And the ability to ask questions and how that can help to really frame more productive discussions on things that are most uncomfortable for us, especially the things that we know are going to hit a nerve, especially with people who have very strong perspectives on something are not often able to kind of broaden the lens, right, to be able to talk about some things. So before I say what I think, I want to pass the mic to Mr. Marco Cirillo because he hasn't spoken yet. So would love to hear from you, Marco, on this.
Sure. To kind of go with what I've been hearing, I guess my big thing that I would add to it is I think really it just deals with the experiences that you've had that determine the conversations that are going to happen. Yeah. You know, I look at like my brother and I love my brother to death, but we could not be further from the beliefs or thoughts. And we grew up in the same house underneath the same values and the same rules. Just the differences are the experiences that we had where I went to school, what I chose for my job versus what he did really determined on the thought process that we have based off of whatever views we look at life now. And I think a lot of the times that's where those kind of discussions happen. I still love him in the end, but, you know, we don't see eye to eye on anything when it comes to that. And, you know, we have those discussions. We just kind of usually choose just to stop, just midway through the conversation. It just turns into looking and go, we're done. This is just not going to go anywhere. Let's just not go any further with it. I think, you know, that happens a lot when you think about holidays. I think you get to that a lot with your families because, you know, there are those individuals that you just don't want to keep fighting with because, you know, like you said, it's a time that you want to just be able to celebrate with each other and you're happy to be with each other, but you know that you're not going to see eye to eye in any way. And I always look at it in the fact of what got you to that point determines on what your thoughts are going to be. And you're not going to be willing to change it until something else starts to sway you in a different direction.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, I appreciate that. And I think that that's really important, right? And I love the part that you brought out that because this is something that I think a lot of families in particular grapple with is we were raised in the same household, right? And we assume that we all think the same, we all feel the same all through life. And it is our lived experiences and how those differentiate among siblings and parents and grandparents, right? From generation to generation, when we think about it, that shapes our viewpoints of the world, of different topics, whether that is politics, right? Whether that is on race relations, policing, things like that, whether that's on the topic of gender and gender identities. And I will say for myself, I kind of vacillate between the two worlds in terms of the Jill position that she had mentioned, where it's like, okay, this is an opportunity for everybody at the table. We don't gather that much. Somebody will raise some topic about something, and then we all, you know, kind of throw our opinions in the hat, if you will. Some do it forcefully. Some do it, you know, a little bit of a dance. We'll throw in a comment and then rush away to another room. It's like throwing a grenade and running. Kind of thing, and that's always fun, and I mean that facetiously. and then also knowing when it's time to kind of fold them and put the cards in your pocket and walk away because it's getting too heated, it's getting too controversial, and it's starting to lead toward maybe people's feelings being hurt, or somebody really taking a hard stand on something and it gets really argumentative and tense, right? So when I was thinking about this for us all, I wanted to talk about, I think, just mainly like three concepts, right, around this. And the first one is what you see up on the screen, which is setting boundaries, right? By letting others know about what you'd like to talk about in terms of a certain topic, but that you have boundaries. And I think it's very healthy and fair to let folks know that you have a certain boundary, that, this is where perhaps I'll exit the conversation, right? I'm thinking of, certainly tough topics around, uh, you know, I don't know, race, sexual orientation, education is a big topic right now in terms of like critical race theory, or just the education dichotomy between people. Employment right now is a huge topic, right? This dynamic of where there are a lot of organizations that can't find employees right now. People say, oh, people don't want to work. And it's like, no, it's not that people don't want to work. What the studies and the data shows and reflects is that a couple of things. Number one, COVID shined a really bright light on what's going on in workplaces, and people are feeling like, unless I really agree with the culture of an organization, I'm not going to spend time somewhere where I'm mistreated, regardless of pay, or there are other things that are going on that are making it a toxic work environment. And then for some other folks, it's got to do with other inequities that are going on in workplaces that people are like, all right, enough already. And so that is a big, topic, like I said, of discussion and contention as a result. Because on the flip side, I've heard people say, like, oh, people are just lazy. They just want to, stay on the system. They're hoping Biden's going to do something else and add more money to unemployment and so forth. And there's also a school of thought and a perspective that, hey, I can make as much money, if not more, on unemployment, but I don't have to deal with the toxicity of the organization that I was looking for, or the unsafe working conditions, or things that were going on there that were contributing negatively to my mental health or my physical health. So there's just a lot of perspectives on different things right now. And so I think it's really important that we for ourselves kind of go into the holidays, into certain forums, and be very mindful before you engage on what are your boundaries, right? What's too far a line to cross? And how do you do that? How do you articulate that, right? And so for me, I'll say my boundaries are name calling, demeaning language, or other ways of communicating that aren't respectful, right? I don't do hand gestures. I don't tolerate the hand gestures, other than the okay, you can flip your hand off to me, but that's about it when it comes to the hand, right? Exactly, Leslie, like, oh, I'm not talking about this, I'm out of here, kind of thing. But I think when it gets, in what I see as disrespect towards myself, that's when I'll say, okay, that's a boundary for me. I'll give a warning, if you will, and say, I can't continue to have a dialogue with you about this if you're gonna scream at me or call me names or flip me off or start cursing to no end. And, you know, not necessarily forcing that onto anyone else in the conversation, but saying, like, this is me, right? We all get to decide for ourselves how we allow others to treat us, how we allow others to engage with us. And so I do think that setting boundaries is really important. And then, secondly, to employ empathy and compassion. And every time I do one of these community conversations, you will hear me beat that drum, because I do feel that it's something that is sorely lacking in community right now. And if you remember, empathy is that putting ourselves in another person's shoes, right? Essentially, if I were to give, just a quick Cliff Notes version of that. And then compassion is kind of taking it a step forward, right? So putting yourself in someone else's shoes, but then compassion is kind of the acting on, standing in the gap for the other person, right? Extending on the empathy that you feel for them, for a particular situation, for a particular group, and then letting compassion lead you to act, whether that's to stand up verbally or stand up physically for someone else. I was talking to someone the other day, and they had said that they're a DEI consultant and they were engaging with an organization, and somebody stood up at the organization and really kind of came at her to say, what the hell do you know about blah, blah, blah? And because of the compassion of a colleague, the colleague physically stepped in front of the individual and said, "This is what she knows about it," and ran down real quick a little bit of her resume. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. And the person telling me about it was like, I didn't expect for her to do that, but that was like she put herself literally in potentially harm's way for me, and stood up to someone that was engaging in, I guess you could say, bullying behavior. And that, for me, when I think about compassion, that's that step forward, right? That goes beyond just, not just, but beyond empathizing with another person to say, hey, I'm willing to stand with you on XYZ. And so can we find ourselves moving from empathy to compassion for someone else, for a particular topic, for a particular group that's being marginalized, that may not even be present, right? And so that's a whole nother level of empathy and compassion, is when people start to engage in negative dialogue about a particular group that's not even present in the home, or in the space that you're in. Can you be that upstander to say, well, wait a minute, you're saying this about this particular, for trans folks, you're saying this about trans folks, but nobody here is trans, so nobody can, if you know that for a fact, nobody here can give that opinion and speak for them monolithically, right? As if everybody is the same and this is the way it goes for all of them. But to be able to stand in that gap in that moment and say, I don't think that it's fair to group this particular group this way, or employ the curiosity to ask, why do you think that way? Why do you feel that way? Why are you, and I think, as somebody mentioned a few moments ago, why are you so angry about that thing? I think Jill did, why is this frustrating you so much? Have you had a negative experience? And that's usually a really interesting one, right? When you ask them, have you had a negative experience? We'll continue the example of trans. And so you often find that people are like, well, no, but yet they have a huge in-depth opinion about something that they actually haven't even experienced themselves, in which they're putting a negative label on.
Well, and I think so.
Go ahead, Joe.
Oh, I think so much of it too. Like, I think back to my birth father, who I'm not extraordinarily close with. He's out of the area, and he comes into the area every once in a while, and we're trying, and he is he's very religious. And so when I told him that I was with Jen, he had a very hard time with it, and he went to his, I guess, pastor, minister. But then when he came to visit, I'll never forget, this is, gosh, like many years ago now, over a decade ago. But when he came to visit, he brought this video with him that the pastor had given him about perspectives from different religions, and we watched it all together. And at one point he said to me in the car, wow, you're just like everyone else, huh? And, I could have flipped, because it was kind of an ignorant thing to say, or a way of saying it, but really he was trying to connect in his flawed way. And so, it's finding sometimes grace as people muddle through. More recently, he came to visit this like maybe 2 months ago, and we went out. He's a historian by love, and so I have a friend who's gay, male, and this friend served in the military and served in the White House. So
Wow.
I thought, oh, this will be really great. Like nothing to do with the fact that he was gay, but like my dad and him will hit it off and have a lot to talk about. So we all get together, we have coffee. It's wonderful. Like my friend is very open with his, that he's married to a man. My dad doesn't have any problem with that. We move on. We're walking out to the car, and my father said, I just want to say that your community is very friendly. I find much more friendly than mine. And I was like, okay, again, very ignorant way of saying it, but he was trying.
He was
So,
trying, yeah.
I think instead of me jumping all over him, it was like,
Yep.
wow, well, thank you for that. But just so you know, people of every community are jerks, and people of every community are awesome. So it's really nothing to do with sexual orientation, just really about who the person is. But I appreciate that you feel that way, and that was your observation. Like, but
Yes.
the old Jill would have been like, and
Yeah.
instead I'm like, okay, he's trying.
Yes. And I think that that's so important, Jill. And I always talk about that, like giving grace to one another as we do this dance, right? Of doing life with one another. I think that that's so important because we have to contemplate the fact that people come from different generations, people come from different backgrounds, and we have to allow a certain amount of latitude to them to catch up, if you will, right? To wrap people's heads and hearts around things that either previously were completely taboo and nobody talked about, or it was something that was talked about secretly, right? Or things that, you just didn't talk to your parents about, or your parents didn't talk to you about. A really interesting dynamic. My husband and I were on the phone yesterday with one of his cousins, and for some reason, we were talking about that she had a family member that had passed away. And during the course of the conversation, we were talking about the fact that a lot of times we find in our community that people don't always say how people died. And it's the weirdest thing to me. Like, you'll just hear that somebody passed away, and it's like, and I'll always ask the question because I'm a curious person by nature. And I say, oh, how did so and so pass away? And my husband might say, like, oh, I don't know, they just died. And I'm like, how do people just die? Like, were they sick? Was there an accident? Like, I don't know. And so we talked about this phenomenon of within not all of the Black culture, but just ourselves and what we've experienced, how people in the family don't always talk about how people passed away. And what we deduce through the conversation with one another is that it likely dates back to slavery, because back in times of slavery, when things happened, people had to accept it. And people did not always, want to know what had happened to folks, or for the protection, weren't people didn't tell other people what happened to so and so, right? As a way to protect them from the truth. And so we kind of went down this road, if you will, in conversation about that, about all the ways that this probably came to be. Yes, Leslie.
I just want to say that currently I ask, was it expected or unexpected? And that usually opens up the door rather than, were they sick or were they not sick? Because, when somebody passes away, you never know. You never know what the circumstances are or how close you were to them. It doesn't really matter. You just ask if people were prepared for them to pass away or not. And then that opens up the door to them telling the story.
Yeah, I agree with that, especially if it's people that you don't really know. In the context of our conversation, we were talking about family members, right? And so I think it's just a natural thing that most people do wonder how, especially depending on age of the individual, et cetera, like how they passed away. And so it was just an interesting dialogue for us and a road to travel to try to understand a little bit better about things that people don't talk about, and why. And so with that, again, I think always approaching and trying to respond to others with understanding, trying to picture yourself in other people's shoes before chiming in and responding, and employing compassion. And then deciding on when's the time to reroute and then re-engage, right? To redirect. So if it's getting to be too much, and I think, Michelle, you mentioned that that's an easy go-to, if you will, for you, is to be able to just say, okay, so what those, Red Sox or Yankees or whatever, just pivoting the conversation
Although,
is
Yvonne, in
helpful.
my house, that would be just as bad of a conversation. No, I'm just kidding. That was to lighten up the mood.
Yes, I agree. I
Like
agree, right?
we could talk about race relation and politics easier than we can talk about the Red Sox Yankees.
Okay, fair enough, fair enough. And that's true, right? Sometimes the sports conversations get like really, really heated. Um, and that's true, but just knowing kind of when it's time to like not take your ball and go home, but redirect the conversation if it's getting too volatile, right? And suggest tabling it for later, or maybe exiting a room and trying to figure out, when you can go ask the host if there's something you can help out with, or whatever. I do want, I came across some information, especially around LGBTQ plus, and I'd like to offer this up, but I really would love Jill's perspective as a member of the community to say actually whether she agrees with these or not, because I always think that it's very important to not speak to a particular thing, especially if you don't have that lived experience around it. Despite education and expertise in certain areas, there's nothing like the real deal, right? And so, some of the things that I came across were, especially if someone present is LGBTQ plus, do not assume how somebody will react to discussions around sexual orientation or gender identity, that you actually might be surprised, right? So instead of going into it with all these preconceived notions, and don't wait for your family's attitude to change to have a holiday and a visit, and assuming that their attitude, even though they know about it, is going to be completely different when they arrive on scene, right? Recognizing that families sometimes need to acknowledge and accept family members and come to terms with it, right? And so that in itself takes time. Comfort are being around people who they may see through their lens as being different. And I don't know, Jill, for you, I think you mentioned about your dad coming around with your wife and him having some challenges before with your choice of a partner. And then again, obviously it sounds like it's still something he's working through to try to get more comfort around that.
Oh no, he likes her better than he likes me now. So
Okay, he's there. He's there now.
I mean, I think he would trade her in for me in a heartbeat. No, so here's the thing I would like to say is, so I'm always really cautious about, kind of like you started to say, Yvonne, you're cautious to say these things because you read them, but you're straight. I'm cautious to say things because I dated men my whole life and then married my wife. So there's like this caveat in my gayness, if you will. Also, I feel that every individual is that individual. So as a woman of color, you're not the same as the next woman of color, and you're not the same. We, except for Marco, all I think identify as women, but we're not all on the same mindset as a woman. So I'm always really cautious. I get in debates I live in a very gay neighborhood, and I have neighbors who get mad at me because I don't have a flag out, a gay pride flag. And I'm like, I don't even have an American flag out. Like so like, but everybody has their perspective. And
yes,
as hard as it is, you have to remember that, the jokes, like I'm a smart aleck, Michelle and Pat know me. I think Leslie, I've been on a call with you before, but Pat and Michelle definitely know that I'm a smart aleck. And, so I always try to lighten the mood with, a joke or whatever. But, the reality is that perspective is perspective is perspective. No two people ever ever are going to have the same perspective, ever. Like Marco said about him and his brother, like everybody has their own perspective. So what I feel might be acceptable isn't necessarily what my wife is going to feel is acceptable. And we're both females who are gay. So I just like, I throw that out there, you know, for me, I am blessed because as someone who walks the earth with white privilege, I can hide my minority status where someone that has brown skin may not be able to. And I've been called on that before. You know, for many years, my wife worked in an industry, male machismo industry, and never identified for quite a while as having a wife because she didn't have to. With that being said, I asked her one time, what was it like to come out? What was your coming out story? You know, well, what's your coming out story, right? And she said, what do you mean my coming out story? I said, well, your big story, you know, when you came out and she goes, Jill, I come out every day. So what do you mean? She said, well, you walk into a room, people assume you're straight. You walk it, so, you know, you have to correct them. Like nobody says, oh, what does your wife do for work? I will frequently get, oh, what does your husband do for work?
Yep.
You know, so I have to remind them, oh no, I'm married to a woman. I have to correct them. You know, Yvonne, people might think you were Spanish. You know what I mean?
Oh
Because
my gosh, I get that all the time.
you know, so you have to correct them. So
Yes.
it's all perspective, I guess, is a long answer to your short question. Sorry.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree with you. And I think, can we give each other the latitude for that, right? To understand that we can't continue to paint each other with these broad brushes, right? And make these assumptions. Marco, I'm curious for you. Do you also get the flip side of that with what Jill said? Do you often get like automatically assume that you're married to a woman, and you are, but is that always the inference for you?
I would say yes, because again, being a white male with privilege, I think everyone kind of automatically thinks that all those pieces are going to always happen. That I'm married with the 2.5 kids, and you know the have the good job and everything's fine. It's
And
just
the
it's an
dog and the
automatic that
picket
people would think.
fence.
Yep.
Yeah.
It is something that people automatically think, and I agree with Jill in the fact of, you know, I'm listening to the story of as she talks about her father, and you know I think of, again, going from my privileged side of it all, the like, you know, he's trying, but then, you know, as she talks, I'm thinking like, you're absolutely right. Like he should, like it's very ignorant the way he's speaking. But, you know, that's again coming through the lens of someone who is going through the work still, like not there yet, still learning as we keep going. So it's just very interesting to hear it and kind of go through the process with it.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. And I think that, you know, again, extending that grace, I think, is the most important thing to one another, no matter, you know, regardless, especially when someone is trying, you know. But here's the flip side. Then what do you do with the person who's not trying? What are you doing? You know, what do you do with the person who you've given them your pronouns, right? Somebody who might be trans or somebody who might go by they, them, theirs, right? And they're giving their pronouns and people are refusing to use their pronouns. And I know what I teach, but I'm curious from the group, you know, how would you address that with family or in some sense of community together? Jill.
Oh,
Oh, Pat.
let Pat go.
Yeah. Oh, you're on mute, Pat. There you go.
No, I'm not. I'm good now. It's interesting because, you know, I learned grammar, and it was really hard for me to remember to say they instead of her or she. Just that's a small thing, but it was difficult. I kept thinking, why am I doing this? But that's the person that I was in conversation with showed me that this is the correct way to address this person. Actually, it's a child, but, and so I didn't question it because I don't have that experience. She does, or they do. Sorry.
Yeah, that was great though. And that's what we're talking about, right? Like for
Right.
you, it's that matter of personal accountability in the moment, right? Of understanding and saying, hey, oops, I made a mistake. I misstepped, right?
Right.
And giving grace, as long as we're continuing to work on it and not just using it. I've seen where other people have used it to kind of chide someone else, right? Or poke at someone else. Or basically, I've had a leader of an organization say, I'm not doing that. I've known this person as him. He will always be him to me. And, that's their own thing. And that's the way they want to refer to themselves. Well, that's fine, but I'm not doing it. And it's extremely degrading, right? And I often talk to folks about like that's no different for me than if being a black woman you called me the N-word. And some people look shocked and it's like, is it really on that same level? I'm like, for people who identify like, yes, yes, it is that offensive to not use my proper pronouns, to not refer to me as I am. And you don't get to choose something else for me just because you can't move forward in your thinking. You can't progress in your heart. You can't progress with how society is evolving.
Hmm.
Yes, Michelle.
So I have to say, since meeting you, I've learned a lot, things that I didn't know. Like you said, once someone makes it clear to you that it is something, then it is, and you take it from there. But I could, I was listening to a teen librarian doing a book discussion, and they were talking about the word they over and over and over. And after, I got the gist of just listening on the other end, it was a Zoom call, like what they were talking about, but it's not like the majority of people in Newington, Connecticut know something about this. You know what I mean? So I'm so glad for what we do. And I'm so glad that each of us is willing to put ourselves out there a little bit. And I'll be the first one to say, I think I'm probably the one who learns the most on every call. And then I can take that in my work and say something to someone, oh, I heard about that. And this is what it is. I'm never going to say I'm the expert or I know a lot about something, but I think just the little bits and pieces that we are getting are like game changing. And so what else don't I know? So I just think it's a great conversation, and if it needs to come out that's what it is, and you just give a short explanation and get some more information to bring back to them. I don't think any of us are in the position to be an antagonist or, put somebody down for having a different view, opinion, idea than any of the rest.
Yeah. I appreciate that. And I will say, being in this space, I am ever learning. I will tell you that, I was talking to someone recently, this big to do about David Chappelle's comedy, his last Netflix comedy show, and talking about trans and trans women and the term TERF. And I'm like, what is TERF? I'm like, oh my gosh, there's another doggone term I've got to learn. And so I had to learn about TERF. And so the point is that we are all should be at this point. What I'm trying to encourage at this point is that we be open to learning more, seeing how society and culture and people are evolving, and to not worry about having it all figured out, but more so just being open to what's possible and learning something new. You don't have to agree with something to learn about it, right? And that's the thing. And I think that's a place where a lot of people get stuck is, okay, well, if I take time to learn about it, then I have to agree with this premise. And it's like, no, you don't. But by educating yourself, you're doing yourself a world of good because you don't actually know what you're missing out on if you don't take the time to educate yourself, and what opening up these doors can do for you, what opening up those doors can do for us as a society, to seeing each other not so differently, but to really start to bring our arms around some of the commonalities we have, but we just don't get the opportunity to experience it because we're so worried about boxing ourselves in based on our differences. Jill, you
You
look
had,
like you had something to say.
well, you had asked the question about what do you do if someone is absolutely, whether it's pronouns or whatever, if they're absolute in their steadfast belief and it's opposite of your belief or hurtful to where you or someone you love is at. Now, I'm talking about in our personal setting because that was the purpose of this, was like, around the holidays, totally different than a workplace. Like clearly there's laws that we would talk about if we were talking about a discrimination case, but in a personal setting, you have to make a choice. If how much is the fight worth? And that's a choice that you have to make for yourself. Like, where's your line? And you kind of said, Yvonne, like where your boundaries are and the things that you'll allow and like the things you'll tolerate. And I'm willing and I want to understand perspective. But if someone makes a simple mistake in gender pronoun usage, for instance, I can understand it. I'm human. I make mistakes. I know that shocks people, but I do. I make mistakes. Just kidding. But there's a difference. Marco, you had said like, with my dad, it's like my dad's doing that because he doesn't know better. He's not doing it out of hatred. He's doing it because he's really like, and I hope he doesn't watch this, but he's kind of like a dope when it comes to that stuff. Like he just doesn't know. He's uncomfortable and he thinks he's doing good. Like he thinks he's bonding with me. He's so there's that difference. And Marco, it's where I can say, hey, Dad, like, I don't even like being called like the community because I'm like I walk into a room and I'm a person before I'm anything else. You know what I mean? But I realize I get that as a choice. You walk into a room, Yvonne, and immediately somebody knows you have a skin color difference. So there's so I'm afforded the luxury, like Marco said, of having that privilege that I get to choose when I want to address some of these topics. So anyway, I just want to say, like, for me, your question about what do, I choose to not be around those kinds of people. That's my COVID awareness, is if you don't bring joy into my life and you don't bring positivity, I will give you opportunity to share your thoughts with me. But if it gets to a point where I feel I'm brought down by you, please lose my number.
Yeah, I'm out. Yeah. And I think that that's really important, right? And that's, preserving our sanity, that's preserving our self-value, right? That's preserving our mental health. That's preserving our heart state. Heck, it's preserving our physical health in a lot of ways, right? Some people get really, really intense into these conversations and arguments. And, I mean, somebody could have, God forbid, they could have a heart attack or something, right? Or something could happen because they get so worked up. And so I do think it's important to preserve our peace whenever we can. But I also do think that when we get the opportunity to educate or to direct someone, to encourage them to learn more, I think that that is important as well. But I think that's on a case by case basis in terms of what you actually do, how you respond, and how you proceed. So, well, oh my gosh, look at that. 7:30, right on the dot. So just closing out some of the key principles I talked about before in terms of development of bravery, which I think are always important to close with, is having open hearts and open minds, and it requires both for personal transformation, cultural transformation, societal transformation. Be curious and stay curious, because we should be ever learning, ever growing. And then giving and receiving grace, right? Which I think is just really important as we do life together. So with that, that is the end. Does anybody have any final questions, final statements? Everybody gets to come off mute and say whatever.
Yvonne, can we just remind people that we'll be back in December and January to go over what we've learned and to start some new ideas going into the new year?
Yes. And Michelle just did that, so I don't even need to do that now. Look at that.
So stay tuned.
I just want to continue to thank you guys. I've done it within the group, but in case this gets outside of the Newington Chamber, I just, this is so important. And it might feel like a small group, and you might be like, oh, there's only this many, but every small group, like every one of us connects with other people. I'm getting on a plane on Friday, and I'm going to be able to talk to people about like this amazing Newington Chamber and what we're doing with these conversations, and that's that power. So I want to applaud Newington for being out in the forefront, and quite frankly for being brave to have these conversations, because this is not easy stuff, and you're doing it. And as a smaller chamber and a smaller community, way to go. So
Oh, thank you, Jill. We appreciate you. I always love it when you come into the mix. I love everyone here and how they participate and their commitment to even having these conversations. So thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for joining. Thank you for being unapologetically authentic. You know, that's my hashtag, girl. And so I think it's really important. Anybody else have any other comments, questions? Nothing? I want to say that, at least not from a visual sense, Pat, I love the fact that you are seasoned and coming in here to continue to learn and grow and sharing that story about pronouns. Like, I really appreciate that, because not a lot of people would come out and say, and tell a little bit about themselves or their misstep, right? Because we have this preservation thing that we like to do, especially in public settings. So I appreciate that.
Well, I'll tell you what. I'm going to be 79 years old in January, and I'm constantly learning every day.
I want to see a birth certificate. I told Pat this on the Newington Women's group. I want to see a birth certificate, because either that or I want her skincare regime, because this woman, I don't buy it.
Good.
I don't buy
Okay,
it.
so I'm going to finish. I've learned, I think part of who you are is your experiences that you've gone through in life, and they haven't always been pleasant, but I've learned from them, fortunately, and I'm still here. And I feel like this is a good experience for me. It has been a learning experience, and I enjoy all of the conversations. They're all a little different. I like the male perspective as well. So that's all I'm saying for now.
Well, thank you for what you said. Thank you for being a part of this conversation. It's really important, and I appreciate your perspective. I appreciate all of you. Thank you, Stephanie, for sharing your story as well. And you have a community of support here, so you can feel free to reach out. Jill's extending Thanksgiving. What did you call it? The Thanksgiving of
It's
Misfits?
our Misfits Thanksgiving.
Misfits Thanksgiving. I love that. I absolutely love that. Don't be mad if I knock on your door, girlfriend.
Oh, I need a week's notice, remember?
A week's notice?
planner.
Okay.
I have
All
to have
right.
a table with a place setting. I'm a planner, girl. Like, and my
Oh
wife would
my gosh.
literally die if you showed up, because she would be like, I need more turkey.
And what time is the invite for?
Yeah,
We're going. We haven't decided. 1 o'clock, I think we usually eat. 1, 2 o'clock, somewhere around there. But it's holidays are supposed to be that, right? If we can't love each other a little bit more after what we just came out of, God,
Yes. We're in
right?
trouble. Yeah.
And Pat, I just want to say how much I respect learning from you, knowing the generation difference. It works both ways. Like, you're here to potentially learn something new, but I'm also learning. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Iron sharpens iron. I love it. I love it. All right, Leslie and Michelle, thank you always for showing up and contributing. Mr. Torillo, any last thoughts?
Just thank you. I love the conversation. It's always great to kind of hear everyone, especially getting a chance to hear from people from Newington, kind of hear what their thoughts are on it too. So I still love it, and I'll keep coming.
All right.
And
awesome.
Don't forget to vote tomorrow.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. Thank you for that. See, I just learned something.
There it is. There it is.
Okay, it's very important. Very important.
Yes. Absolutely. It's another way we get to use our privilege when you really think about it. Our ability to vote is a privilege. So I always encourage people to use those things, use that privilege that you have because people fought for it. So,
All right.
all
You know,
right.
it's a privilege.
Thank
I got
you.
Ben and Jerry's ice cream in the freezer, so I'm going.
Whew.
Bye.
All right. Bye.
Thank you very
Bye,
much.
everybody.
All right. Till
Bye-bye.
next time, everyone. Thank you for joining Newington Courageous Community Conversations.